for me, that was like my first big failure, because up until 14 years, every 2 or 3 years, I was being promoted and promoted and promoted and promoted, and then all of a sudden I'm canned, and my life just went to shambles. Like, okay, what am I going to do? And it's like, and then took probably about a week or 2 weeks to say, well, what the heck? I'm still the same guy. I still know the same things I knew 2 weeks ago. And I viewed myself, and the learning curve, for me was that I needed to brand myself. Up to that point, I was an employee, right? I was moving up in the organization like a rocket ship, but at the end, I still viewed myself as an employee inside of an organization. And then I had a bunch of stops in marketing and sales. I said, why don't I look up myself as a brand? And why do people buy brands? Well, they buy brands because they stand for something.
What story are you telling? Whether you're intentional about it or not, you have an audience and they think in story. The Doug Thompson podcast features diverse storytellers sharing their practical tips for telling the story they need others to envision and trust in order to take a new action. Here's your host, Doug Thompson.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Doug Thompson podcast, where we talk storytelling with some great storytellers. I am your host, the Doug Thompson, and with me this week I've got a newly published author. He's got a great book out. He's got experience as CEO, but more importantly, he's got experience as a storyteller. Before we got on, which I want him to share, he was telling me about his trip to Ireland, which I thought was pretty good. But my guest today, Thomas Kereszti. Kereszti? Yeah, did I get that right? Kereszti. Kereszti? We just Kereszti. We just went over this. So with me today is Thomas Kereszti. I wrote it down. So how you doing today, Tom?
Doing fine. Southern California. Today was 85 degrees and it's only March. So we're happy.
Wow. Well, I know I talked to somebody from California the other day and it was 80 degrees and they were hot. So I guess it was just too early for them for that. So Tom, tell a bit about your background.
Well, I guess the best way to know me is not just me, but every individual should be able to answer these three questions, and I would encourage them to do so. The first question is, who are you? And I'm a servant leader. I've been a servant leader probably for the last, 25, 30 years. It's still something that I'm working on to get better at, but that's kind of describes who I am. And then the second question everybody should be able to answer is, what are you passionate about? And my passion is adding value to people, making people better, making companies better, making products better. And then the third question is, what are you good at? And I'm pretty good at mentoring and leading. So the beauty of that equation is, if I know who I am, and if I know what I'm passionate about, and if I know what I'm good at, if I kind of focus on living my life in that sweet spot, I'll probably be, successful doing that, because I love doing it and I'm good at doing it. And I have a good idea of who I am. And then, life becomes a lot easier. The other nice thing about it is I don't have to reinvent myself. I heard one time somebody said, well, you should act one way at work and you should act one way, it's just too confusing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, how do you keep track of all that? So with a simple formula, look, I can mentor my kids, I can mentor my employees, I can add value to my customers, I can add value to my friends, or I can value to, I can be a servant leader of my family, I could be a servant leader at work, I could be a servant leader at church. So I don't have to reinvent myself depending on where I am, what situation I'm in.
And I've been in sales, tech sales most of my life, and I've met those people, which are totally different at work than that. And I didn't trust them as far as I could throw them. Simply because, you are who you are. It's like work-life balance. There's no such thing. It's life, and you have to balance life out. Now, you did mention, which I thought was interesting, I think they tie together, is who you are and what you're passionate about. And you talked about you're still working on that. It's still a work in progress. And I think that's the right attitude to take at it, because I think at the one point in time when you've got it mastered, then you sort of lost sight of being a servant of people.
Well, look, I'll stop learning the day I'm 6 foot under.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Every morning I get up every day, I learn something new. It may be somebody from younger than me, maybe somebody from older than me, maybe something that I read. So I continue to grow all the time. And by the way, I continue to fail still. Even at the ripe age of 65, I make stupid mistakes, and I fail, but I learn from them, and I grow from them. So, it's a journey. The whole life is a journey. I hate using that word journey because, my daughter got me into watching Bachelor about 20 years ago, and I never heard the word journey used so many times in my life. So I hate it now, and I stopped watching Bachelor and Bachelorette about 5 years ago. But it is, maybe there's a better word, but life is a journey, and growing is a journey, and it never stops. If you believe that you achieved the destination, then you got kind of stuck. What do you got to look forward to tomorrow?
How about we can call it a story whose end hasn't been written yet?
There you go. I like it.
That's actually a better part of life is because we're always on this. Each of us have our own hero's journey. Oh, there we go with journey. Sorry, I've tried to get rid of it. But we're all in this, and we go through struggles. Like I said, we go through learning things. And if we're trying to grow, it's always going to be. I had somebody tell me if I'm not making mistakes, then I'm not learning and I'm not growing. Right? Then I've stopped living. And I think too many people get afraid of mistakes, and I'm really concerned for the generation now with the students and the pressure they have to be the best in their class and be the best at music or the best at sports. And if they fail, I find a lot of times when they do fail, finally, they haven't learned how to be resilient and recover from that and move on. And as you as a leader, you said you failed. How did you sort of come about that? How did you develop that resilient spirit?
Well, one of the things that, the first time I failed big, I got, after 14 years with a company, I can't. Now there's a whole nother, story of why that happened. But for me, that was like my first big failure, because up until 14 years, every 2 or 3 years, I was being promoted and promoted and promoted and promoted. And then all of a sudden I'm canned, and my life just went to shambles. Like, okay, what am I going to do? And it's like, and then took probably about a week or 2 weeks to say, well, what the heck? I'm still the same guy. I still know the same things I knew 2 weeks ago. And I viewed myself, and the learning curve, for me was that I needed to brand myself. Up to that point, I was an employee, right? I was moving up in the organization like a rocket ship, but at the end, I was still viewed myself as an employee inside of an organization. And then I had a bunch of stops in marketing and sales. I said, why don't I look up myself as a brand? And why do people buy brands? Well, they buy brands because they stand for something. They have a legacy, they have a heritage, people can trust them. Those are what good brands are. And people buy them for the reason. So I said, let me brand myself. And I said, okay, how do I brand myself? And at that time I was in emerging markets. So I said, okay, well, what I've done for the last 15 years, I started companies up, or I started departments up, or I turned things around which were not profitable, not doing well. So I became, quote unquote, a startup turnaround specialist in emerging markets. That's how I branded myself. And then, a whole bunch of doors opened up for me. Right. But that's, if you just kind of fail and you give up, well, that's no good. But if you fail and you learn from it, then you can take it somewhere.
I've always heard you've never failed until you quit trying. Other times you've just had setbacks. And it sounds like at that point in time, you went from becoming a background character in the story of Tom's life to the main character and the hero. At that point in time, you sort of hit this inflection point where, oh, I got to pick myself up and do this. And you sort of realize, now I'm going to start writing my own story.
Absolutely. I think part of, and you said about the new generation, the X and the Y's and the Z's, and, they live so much of their life through social media. And there ought to be a social media where you feel comfortable posting stories about failure, right? Because everybody, I don't care if it's TikTok or, there's some, stupid videos, I guess you could say that, failure because they fall on their heads or, hurt their bodies, and people watch it a million times. But, for the most part of it, social media is about all these wonderful things that I'm doing and living. Rarely do you see anything that's a failure. And that's kind of a false narrative. I mean, everybody fails.
Yeah, it is. And it's how you recover from that failure. And like I said, everybody on Facebook has a great life, and see, it's easy to get in the mode that I stink because I am not having all these other things. You don't see the bad days, you don't see the other stuff that goes on. So I think you're right with the social media. So get on you. What got you to write this book?
So the way I wrote the book is, as a public speaker, one of the things that they teach us is gather your stories, right? The reason you have stories is because when you're on stage, first of all, you can't forget your stories. They're all your own stories. So if you forget your own stories, you got a problem.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget facts, right?
Yes.
But you can't forget your own stories.
Yes.
And people relate to stories better. Stories depict you as a human being, right? It's not a fact. It's not data. It's an experience that you had, and you can't argue with your experience. It's your experience. It's not somebody else's. So I was writing all these stories down to be able to use in public speaking when I'm on stage. And then, probably about 6-9 months into it, I said, man, I got enough stories here to write a book. So then I looked at the stories and I said, okay, well, why would anybody read these stories? How do I structure them? And then when I reflected on these stories, I kind of started piecing together. I said, well, in this story, I was doing pretty good. And in this story, I wasn't doing so good. So then I said, okay, what's the common links? Right? And this is where I came up with what I call the 4 keys of leadership success. And most of the time when the stories were positive stories or they were successful stories, those 4 keys were all, firing on all cylinders. If I looked at a story which wasn't successful or depicted, a negative or failure story, then in those stories, one or more of those keys were missing. So that's why I came up with these 4 keys of leadership success. And then after I put it together, I said, okay, is it just me? Or let me look around at other leaders or other successful companies, and do they share these same 4 principles? And lo and behold, they did, right? So I said, okay, well, that's enough encouragement. So then I wrote the book.
That's cool. And I like the documenting those things a little bit at a time. And you're right. I can't remember facts, right? And I can't read off a teleprompter and I can't read a script, but the stories and the conversations that we carry with us, I have the ability to carry on a conversation with people, and it brings out things. That's the podcast host thing. But we were talking earlier, and stories are everywhere. And I think it's a lost art to a lot of the people in the U.S. especially, and very smart technical people never really learn how to do that. But you were telling me a story about when you and your wife went to Ireland. Can you sort of elaborate on that again? Because I want to sort of touch on what I think that is.
Yeah, so I'm Hungarian heritage. So we've lived all over there. We lived in Hungary and many other places of the world as an expat. And my wife always said that she wants to go to Ireland because she's half Irish, half Italian. God knows we've been to Italy,
you're in trouble.
a dozen times or 10 times. Yeah, a temperamental, stubborn wife, but I love it there for 40 years. So we went to Ireland, and we spent, I think, about 10 days there. We landed in Dublin, spent 2 days in Dublin, and then rented a car and literally drove down on the East Coast, down to the southern part, and then drove all the way up on the West Coast, all the way around to Belfast, back to Dublin. So in an island that's only about 300 kilometers wide, we drove about 1,200 kilometers. So we drove a lot. We saw Ireland. We got to talk to people, some little towns. I mean, Dingle is a lovely little town. The Dingle pub is, in fact, one of the Irish dancers, one of the best Irish dancers in the world, is the son of the owner of the Dingle pub, and he performs there just about every night. So talk about a gem.
Yeah.
But one of the nice things that I loved about Ireland is everybody speaks to you. Everybody's got stories. Everybody's got stories to share. So you're not talking about the weather, and you're not talking about this and that. You're talking about genuine stories. And in fact, we were, I think it was Cork, but I'm not sure if it was Cork. It was another small, little town, and we're sitting in a pub, and we're talking to this old gentleman. I think it was Seamus or something like that. His name was, and I can't really, kind of give it the Seamus accent, But he said, look, the Irish are, somebody walks down the street, and they see them walking towards you. They look you in the eye, and they strike up a conversation and they talk to you. As opposed to the British, he says the same guy gets on the same train, sits in the same seat every day, doesn't know anybody around him, and he does that for the next 20 years. And that's just the bloody Irish. And he was so kind because one of the reasons we went to Ireland is also for my wife to discover a little bit of our heritage. And apparently her distant cousin was this guy, Sean Casey. And Sean Casey apparently was one of the rebels during the Irish Revolution. So she was, sharing this story with Seamus at the bar. And, Seamus just kind of gets up and goes up to the band and comes back down and keeps talking to us. And then before you know it, the band is playing this ballad about Sean Casey, right? But not only they talk to you, they listen to you, and they go out of their way for little things, to make your life a little bit better. And I just had a really great 10 days there.
That's outstanding. I need to get up there at some point in time, and I can equate that to, if I go to New York City, it's very much, your head's down, you don't talk, you don't look at, because they know you're a stranger if you come and you start looking at people. But if you come down to the southern parts of the state, Texas, where I live, other than Austin, which is now everybody else, it's not really Texas anymore. But you get to much the same thing. You go in and you talk to people and you learn about their story. But one of the things that you brought up in the stories, I want you to think back about this. Did they answer those 3 questions that you did when you introduced yourself? Did they, who they are, what they're passionate about, and what they're good at?
Well, no, that takes a little bit while to. Some people, first of all, don't even know the answers to that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's not something that just kind of comes up in conversation, right? But if you talk to somebody long enough, you'll figure out what they're passionate.
Yeah, that's,
right? If you're passionate about something, you're going to talk about it. You're not going to hide it.
Exactly.
Right? So you'll figure it out sooner or later.
But that was sort of my point. It wasn't that they weren't real succinct about it like you are. But as they told their story, they covered those parts. They covered to let you know who they were, and you can uncover what they're passionate about, although they didn't really directly tell you that. And you could probably tell they're pretty good telling stories, pretty good talking to people or whatever, making beer or doing dancing, right? So you could do that as well.
Well, yeah, Guinness doesn't taste anything like, Guinness in Ireland has got totally different taste than the rest of the world. So, if you don't do anything else, go to Ireland and drink Guinness, because that's the best in the world.
Yeah, I like that. So in your experience, what makes a great leader versus just simply a CEO? What's sort of the nuance between that? And I know there's 4 keys to that, but
look, you don't have to be a CEO to be a leader, right? You could be anybody's. Like, one of the stories I talk about my wife a lot, but we're living in England at the time, and this was during 9/11, right? So everybody knows where the heck they were at 9/11, or unless you're a Z generation, because you weren't born yet. But we're living in England in 9/11, and we're only a few miles from Heathrow Airport. In fact, funny story, when we were renting the house, we went out because I was an expat, so you don't buy your rent. We waited about an hour and a half because the real estate agent was stuck in traffic. And we have this beautiful house, which is called the Manor Farmhouse, because there they don't have numbers on the house. They have names for the houses. So this was the Manor Farmhouse. We're waiting there about an hour and a half. Finally, the guy shows up, and we're in the middle of birds singing, chirping, and cows mooing and whatnot. And then, this is a beautiful house. We're going to take it. We're going to rent it. And then the day we're moving in, all of a sudden the walls are shaking. Like, what the heck is going on? We go, there's a Concorde flying over. So we were directly in the flight path of Heathrow. But the day we were waiting, I guess they were using a different flight path. But anyway, so 9/11 happens, and Kathy's watching Sky News, which is the news in Britain, and there's just thousands and thousands and thousands of people stranded at Heathrow Airport. And Kathy says, look, I feel compelled. I got to do something. I don't know what I'm going to do. I feel compelled to do something. So she says, I'm going to go to the airport and see how I can help. So she goes out to the airport, and British Air says, look, it's an act of war. We can't help anybody. You're all on your own. And the 2 stories that emerge is that some tourists are running out of money, and Heathrow is one of the most expensive airports in the world. And nobody has a place to sleep or shower because all the hotels are full. So, Kathy, her light goes on. And look, at this time, I'm the CEO, I'm the expat, I'm the guy with the budget, I'm the guy with the corner office, I'm the guy with the, staffing. So, if it's about money or staffing or people, I'm the guy.
Yeah.
Right? Well, and Kathy's my wife, and she's, raising our kids. And so she says, well, look, we have a big expat community in London in the school, and my kids went to Tassa school. She gets on a phone tree and say, hey, guys, can you house some of these people?
Mm-hmm.
And they say, sure, we got the spare bedroom, why not? So before you know it, we got the school bus that comes out to the airport, picks up a whole bunch of people. The bus goes back to the school parking lot, and people pick up these, folks that are stranded tourists and housing them, right? Because they got food, they got refrigerators, they got showers, they got spare bedrooms. And then the next day, there was 4 international schools. So my kids went to Tassos, but there was Coburn, which had 2 schools, International School London. So now we got 4 schools, 4 school buses, 4 times as many families. So we were able to house hundreds, if not thousands of families.
Yeah.
So look, if it was really about, the CEO, the title, the corner office, it would have been me. But it was really about just finding, finding a leadership need, and a good deed, I guess, a cause, and people rallied behind it. And you can still Google her last name in 9/11, and they'll tell you that it's on internet.
Yeah.
She worked with British Air, she worked with Virgin Air, so it was just finding a need, stepping in, taking a leadership role.
That's truly a great example of servant leadership. Why do you think that servant leadership is the best way to do that, or really, in many cases, I think it's really the only successful way to do that?
Well, look, a servant leader understands it's not about them. It's something about much bigger than them. And I thought, as a CEO, as a servant leader, I had the easiest job in the room, because my job was simply to make sure that everybody understood the culture and the vision, and making sure that I created an environment where everybody could be successful. You hire the right people. I don't think you should hire stupid people and micromanage them. I think you should hire smart people and get out of the way, and just, if they need some training, give them some training. If they need assets, tools, whatever, give them the things that they need to be successful, and make sure they understand what is their role in making the overall vision and a success.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what really servant leadership is about. You're there to serve your employees, you're there to serve your customers, and to point also your shareholders, right? But it's not about you. If you think it's about you, then you're not so smart.
Yeah, I've been around a few of those that unfortunately fell in that latter category. When you are that type of leader and you're talking to different types of employees or different stakeholder groups, if you will, how did you sort of come up with a story that was appropriate to that audience? Because it has to be relevant to them. It has to be something they're familiar with. If you start talking technology to somebody that's never seen, technology, it's not going to ring true. How did you sort of adapt your stories or message to go to those different audiences?
I don't think I can give you a straight formula of how that would work. But obviously you should know before you go into any meeting. I call it the meeting before the meeting. Who's going to be in that room? And you should know something about those individuals that are going to be in the room, and who are maybe just cheerleaders, who are decision makers, who hold the purses. So once you have a good idea of your audience in any particular conference room or customer base or whoever you're talking to, then you can pick those personal stories, which would hopefully, motivate them, energize them, relate to them. You can't really come up with stories that if you don't know who your audience is. But, step number 1 as a servant leader, again, it's not about you, it's about the people in the room.
Yeah.
So figure out who's in the room.
Yeah, no, and that's perfect answer for that. I call it starting your story where the audience lives. So you've got to make it personal and relevant to them to get their buy-in for that. And you did a perfect example of how to sort of do that as a technique to do that. And and that's why you're good at your craft. You're good at the CEO piece, and you're good as a speaker and an author as well, I'm sure. So how do people get a hold of it? And we got the book, so I'm sure that's available on Amazon and all. And I'll put all these links in the show notes of all that. But
yeah, everything. I mean, you can buy anything on Amazon,
yeah.
including this book. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all kinds of online retailers. International, there's a couple of UK retailers that carry it as well. My last name is my blessing and my curse, because as we try to pronounce it in the beginning, it's not easy.
Yeah.
But the good news is, if you look for Kereszti out there, and you find my two daughters and my sister, that's about it.
Okay.
So it's easy to track me down. You can look for me on LinkedIn. You can look for the book on Amazon. I have my, obviously I got my own website. So I have an open door policy. Any questions you have for me, just, drop me an email, or you can go to my website and just kind of fill in the form. And yeah, I'll jump on a call with you, and we'll chat a little bit.
Cool. Well, Tom Kereszti with the silent Z, I really appreciate you taking the time today, sharing your story, sharing your servant leadership thoughts, and good luck with the book. Good luck with life in general, and congratulations on 40 years. I've celebrated 4 years with my woman who's part German, so I don't know. Anyway, thanks a lot, Tom.
Gesundheit.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.